famous brain dump. We are back yet again. And I am so excited today, not just because I am in Cancun, but also because we have Tim Rist here, Discover Oregon Real Estate. And initially, Tim and I were connected through a real estate coaching program, Forward Coaching. I'd had a coach and we really didn't connect. And I'd asked for someone who had some specific construction experience, and they connected me with Tim. And I mean, it wasn't 5 minutes. I was like, I love this guy. Like, he is just so full of energy and he is so positive. Like, you can't help but be positive to be around this guy. He's amazing. So we ended up doing some coaching sessions together, became friends to that program. We've been to now two conferences together. He joined us in Vegas, Inman, which is where I think, Jamie, you initially met him.
Yeah. Yeah, great to have you on the podcast, Tim. I'm just thinking back to those times in Vegas last year, and I think my first memory hanging out with you is we're on this nice speakeasy, joined the band, and then suddenly Tim's on stage singing and playing the guitar. So yeah, Tim is an awesome person, and it's great to have you on the podcast, Tim. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, guys. I'm honored to be here. Thanks for inviting me. Yeah, good vibes. Early morning in Oregon. I'm ready for a cold plunge and a brain dump.
Love that. So what time is it in Oregon right now?
It's 6:15 right now.
Okay.
Oh, bloody hell, it's early for you.
It's 9:14 in Mexico right now.
Wow. Well, it's 2 p.m. for me. I'm getting wrapped up on my Friday and about to go home. So
I love that.
Spread across the world.
Yes.
But yeah, I guess, Tim, really keen to hear kind of what you're doing, what you're up to, but also diving into your background and how you got there. So can you tell us a bit more about what you do?
Who is Tim Rist
Tim?
at the core, you know?
Tim Rist at my core. I like a ball of atoms, giant frequency of energy that came into this world at one of 8 children in a backcountry small town of like 500 people in the country of Oregon. And I'm a work in progress. I'm looking to change the world. I would say that's the most important thing about me. I'm looking to just if this is all we get, if we just get this one beautiful life, and if it's like a shooting star that goes across the sky for a moment, I just want it to be as bright and magnificent as possible. And so,
like a supernova just going across the sky.
Yeah, hopefully not like exploding solar planets and burning everything up. At least putting on a show and leaving a positive legacy behind. So who am I? I'm a man on a mission. My mission is to live fully, to love deeply, and to leave a positive legacy behind. So that's whatever I do. I hope it falls under that mission. I'm honored to be here. I love connecting with high frequency people like the two of you. We've had some great times together, and you guys are movers and shakers. So I like to spend time with people who are doing something.
You know what is so funny for you to say that? And I find it so refreshing is that, like, especially, and I've said this so many times to my husband, I'm like, you know what I love so much when we hang out with Jamie? It's that, like, you can go out, you can have the best fun time ever. And the next morning at breakfast, Jamie is like business strategizing and just talking about taking over the world. And he's so good at that, just always being able to push you and have fun with you. And that's what I think is so amazing about him. And I think you're a lot like that. Looking back, so you were one of 8 children. You didn't start out in real estate. I hear you actually started out in construction, had your own construction company. So you've been an entrepreneur since day one.
Yeah. And I was more like an operator underneath someone else's branch. In college, that's how I put myself through. So I guess the speed story was, the motto in my home. We grew up probably below the poverty line, and so entrepreneurship probably started at like 12. When I wanted to do stuff, I wanted to play football. There wasn't extra money for extracurriculars. And so if I wanted to do something, then I had to go knock on doors, mow yards, do handyman work to pay for whatever it was that I wanted to do. And so that started at about 12. And I actually ended up moving out of my house around 14. So I had a little bout of actually being a homeless youth by my own choice. I was living with 10 people in a 4-bedroom house, right? So there was a season early in my life where I realized I liked sleeping outside. And so I actually started my journey of valuing a sense of home by sleeping in a tent out in the winter. I had some kind of stark moments of like waking up in a pool of water. I'm having everything I own get soaked, and I'm kind of having an early shock to the system of what it felt like a little bit to be homeless. I mean, I still had a home, and looking back, I actually had like so much privilege, even though it felt like we didn't have as much money as some of our neighbors or friends. Like it really all ended up being a gift because it pushed me to work hard. But certainly in that environment, the pressure was to find a way to get out the door and start life sooner rather than later. And so for me, that looked like starting college at 15. And then when I was 17, I transferred to a university that I had to pay for myself. And I realized that, trading time for money at an hourly job, making pizza or doing farming or doing like handyman work wasn't going to cut it. So I started managing paint crews and running a painting business. And so by the time I was 19, I had about 100 employees, and we were booking jobs in the spring as college students, and then we were painting houses in the summer. And that was really where I cut my teeth on sales management, was actually teaching college students who didn't know anything about business or painting to do both.
That's awesome. So you were kind of motivated to be a mentor, a coach, and a trainer very early on.
Yeah, I loved it. I mean, I really fell into it. I didn't know that business or coaching was going to be a passion of mine. I just got lucky and found myself in it. I was doing a lot of volunteer work. I was involved in my church at the time, doing music stuff, and so there's kind of these paths that diverged. And I was studying communications in college because that was my greatest fear. Like I grew up in this kind of sheltered, almost isolated upbringing. And so when I went to the advisor's office and they said, you got to pick a major if you're going to be at a university, I was like, I'm 17. I have no idea what I'm going to do with my life.
No one does.
And so I just went through the list and picked the thing I was most terrified of. And I started with nuclear engineering, and I realized that I was more afraid of public speaking. And so I changed my major to communications, and I realized that was like the easiest major in hindsight. I ended up lucking out on that. But it really was like my greatest terror was getting in front of people and speaking. And they say the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. And for me, like moving into that fear and then finding myself secure in a formerly insecure environment was a huge key for freedom for me that opened up a lot of doors.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Really important. Jamie, did you ever have any type of entrepreneurial or like speaking courses or anything that you had to do that as a young individual?
I think from my experience, I was like heading into London when I was like 16, 17, going to meetups around tech. And I just realized if you go up to people and shake their hand and talk to them, they want to talk to you, which kind of slowly snowballed into confidence of actually going up on stage and giving presentations around technology. So it's just really fascinating to hear about your background, Tim. Like the fact that you went from living on the street to running this paint company. That's what's really giving me some questions around here. Like, how did you go from, you said you were like making pizza by the hour and everything, how did you get into paint? Like, was that just something that you saw on a billboard and you're like, I can get into that? Or was it something you had prior experience with? That's what I'm really curious about.
Yeah. So, a couple things that felt like luck or blessing early on. My uncle moved down the road from us, bought a lot down the road from us when I was like 13. And so between 13 and 15, 16, I'm basically, me and my brothers built this shop in this 4,000 square foot home with my uncle. And so we got to learn like every phase of construction. And he was meticulous. He was fastidious. He's a brilliant guy, problem solver. I mean, he built this whole thing out of a book. right? He had never built a house before. And so we were almost learning along with him. And it was a very slow multi-year construction process. But that is where I cut my teeth on construction. And then like the idea of running my own business, it was partially born out of necessity. Like a day in my life at 15 years old, like if you picture a kid rolling into a community college, I had basically been self-schooled / homeschooled my whole life. So my education looked like my mom would say, hey, you got $100 for your education budget this year. And here's a catalog of books. You've got to go check out, you got to touch these 10 subjects, and $100 is not going to be able to be enough to buy, 10 new books. So you're going to have to grab some hand-me-down school books off the shelf, erase the answers, have some self-integrity, because if you don't learn, you're screwed. And then, whatever new books you want to buy, here's the budget, here's the catalog.
So you didn't go to school? Like you didn't? Wow, I did not know that.
Yeah, my mom taught me how to read, and then basically from third grade on, I would pick out all my own books and self-schooled until college. So that means there were some serious holes. So I'm picking a long answer to your question, but a day in the life at 15 was I lived like a 20 mile drive from college, and so I would get on my bike at like 5 a.m. and ride my bike to a community college where I was really learning stuff for the first time that kids coming in from a public school education had a little bit more of a foundation on. And so I'm like in this hypercharged like catch up mode. And then I would go to classes from 8 to 5 or whatever, and then I would ride my bike another 10 miles ish to go shake a banner. So I wasn't even making pizza. I had literally I started outside just shaking a banner in front of Domino's Pizza. That the guy on the side, yeah, $5.99 one topping large pepperoni. That's where I started in sales. Was walking across the crosswalk and just putting a sign in front of people and just making them turn into the parking lot.
I love
and
that.
So I would do that, and then I ran a baler and a night crew for a farming company, and so I would work from like 5 to 9 or 11 at Domino's Pizza, and then I would have this is back when I didn't have a smartphone or anything, so this is back when you'd print off map quests, and I would map quest to a random GPS in a random field and ride my bike in the night to go start a baler up, and I'd run a hay baler from like midnight to 5 a.m. And then I would ride my bike back from this random field out in the country to the community college I was going to. And then I would sleep for like an hour on like one of the benches. And then I would go to class and I would do that. So that was like my year in college was some version of that schedule. And I was like, that was enough to like pay for books, right? And I had some, there were some other things that helped out along with that. But when I went to Oregon State, I knew that wasn't going to work, right? Because now I'm paying for like full university credits. I didn't have any way to take out debt. Like there wasn't student loans. For whatever reason, didn't feel like an option. I was raised to like resist debt at all costs. And so it was literally someone came into a class talk saying, hey, there's a student internship that'll teach you how to run your own painting business. And I just signed up. That's its whole own story. They didn't hire me. They rejected me the first time they hired me. And then they were doing another round of hires the following spring term. I got in through a different hire person, basically a different recruiter hired me the second time through, because the first time I was getting interviewed for that internship, I actually got hit by a car on the way to the interview. So picture like this is my big break moment. Like I needed to do something different. And I'm riding my bike to this interview, and I put a lot of miles on my bike. So I was pretty confident, almost too confident, and just completely tuned out. And I was in the bike lane, and a car literally just was making a right turn, and my bike just went under their car. I went over their hood. They just turned. They didn't see me. They turned right into me. Like it was like slow motion. And I just rolled over the hood of the car into like a little grass triangle patch on the other side, just completely covered in mud, right? This is like dead of winter. My bike is a little potato chip, and they just took off. And so I remember I still had a mile to go. And how I got that job was putting my potato chip bike on my shoulders and sprinting across campus like a crazy muddy person and showing up to an interview and covered in mud to share this story to my interviewer, who is basically like, hey, we're just looking for kids who want to run their own pinning business, and we're going to give them the toolkit. It's commission only, so their risk in the game was going to be minimal. But they didn't know I was 17. When they asked me how old I was, I just told them I was a junior in college. And so they just assumed that I was 21. But because I had already gotten my associates at 16, I had hacked the system. So when they finally papered me up and I had to bring ID in, I realized they were hiring me for a business I couldn't actually legally pay for. And so entrepreneurship evolved really quickly into sales management, like construction management, because I was running crews and I was legally not allowed to paint on my job site. So I had to figure out how to lead people early on, just by nature of running a business where my own time wasn't covered under the workman's compensation policy. So there's my long-winded answer. Necessity.
That's mad.
They say necessity is the great inventor, right, of solutions. Yes. And so I needed something I could scale my income, and I was able to use that business to basically graduate debt-free and support a lot of people along the way.
Yeah. I mean, I just see immense grit throughout this whole journey, from the determination to drive a baler in the middle of the night to getting this interview for a paint company. It's just, yeah, it's fascinating. And I think a lot of people, when they start their business, they don't realize how much grit you need to actually show up every day, call up sales prospects every day, be told no 1,000 times until you get that sale. So I think it's fascinating that you have kind of built this, you've like weathered yourself over years through just crazy experiences, which feels like it's been a kind of great element that's helped you to make sales and grow your business. When you started this business, like, it sounds like you had that grit. Was there anything that you thought you had that you didn't, and it was that kind of experience of running that business gave you that skill?
Yeah, so many things that I thought I had that I didn't. I think at first, like, I was so trepidatious, right, when I jumped into that business model, but I was able to kind of gauge my skill set. Among all the construction I had done, the one thing I had never done was painting. So interestingly, like, I am running a painting business, and I know I can work hard is basically what I know. And I really didn't even feel like I was that smart. Like, I felt a little bit dumb all through, 15, 16, 17. I'm in classes with people they're all older than me. They all know more than me, right? So I'm always playing catch up.
I feel like that's a huge key component, Tim, because I think sometimes one of our biggest downfalls is that we think we know more than we know. We think we're better than we are. And I tell that to my team all the time. You have to be humble and realize if you're the smartest person in the room, you need to go to another room. If you think you know everything, you do not, you probably know nothing. Like, I always want to learn and learn from other people and other situations. And I think the fact that you felt so open to learning is probably what helped really accelerate you so quickly, is that you were willing to learn from the painter. Most people would have said, I'm the boss, you do what I say, but you were internalizing everything they were doing. I think that probably played a huge role in your early on success.
Yeah. And I think that it fluctuated both ways. After I had some success, I took as a 17-year-old, I ran $100,000 painting business. Then I grew it to $500,000 as an 18-year-old, hired and recruited a bunch of students. Then I grew to $750,000. And that was just producing in the summertime. So we only had 2 months out of the year that we were painting, and we were restarting these crews. A lot of these kids were recruiting and then starting over again. And so when I got to see those numbers matched up against other people across the country that were using a similar model, I started to realize that, well, I might actually be a player. And I really did, I almost let that get to my head by the time I graduated college at 19. I was I was operating $1 million in business. And I did, I thought what I had was kind of this indestructible unstoppable nature, because I realized, like, compared to a lot of the kids that were showing up at 19 in college as freshmen who really had done nothing, I was walking out of college with almost a 4.0 GPA, no debt, and paid for most of it myself off a business that I had no business running. If we looked at the stats, right, it was illegal for me to paint for it when I started it. I had no idea about painting. The first time I painted a house or ran a sprayer was in front of a painter that I was teaching how to run a sprayer, and they had no idea that I'd never run it before. It was literally my roommate who I woke up out of bed because my crew chief just no-showed on the job one day, and I was like, I need to paint these houses. And so I pulled one of my roommates out of bed and said, I need you to come work for me. And he's like, I don't know how to paint. I was like, I'll teach you. And so I remember the first moment I ran a paint sprayer was actually showing him how to spray a house.
That's amazing.
Spray and pray, man.
Spray and pray. That's exactly what it was. And we actually had to paint that house twice because it didn't go well. But after that, like, everything was like, we had really good customer service. But I look back on that, and I ended up at the end of that journey, I ended up breaking my back. I ended up herniating my L4, L5 disc. I didn't follow safety practices. Like, there was this hubris that was born of success early on. And so for me, it was like this really quick spike into success and this like really colossal failure that could have been way worse, which was like,
even a broken back, Tim. How worse could have it been?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm not a quadriplegic, but I mean, the broken back was from snowboarding, but the herniated disc was from working on that injury, right? So I was running crews, my back healed improperly, and then I blew out my L4, L5 from just, throwing around 40-foot extension ladder, showing up with that chip on my shoulder, which served me to some degree, but it didn't. Like, what's the common denominator in my first quarter of life was I had a chip on my shoulder. I had something to prove, and that was a huge energy source. But it actually only served me for so long because it cost me self-awareness and how I was showing up in relationships, and it cost me a focus on sustainable practices of like, I'm going to win the now. And I really was not thinking about the fact that I've got to carry this body with me for the rest of my life. I was working 120 hours a week, living out of my car. And so I hit a crash and burn at 19 years old coming out of college.
That's the entrepreneurial roller coaster. I mean, if you think about it, so many of us are all guilty of this is how we're running every single day with it's nonstop. And then you crash, or you're doing just this loop of high, low. But it's really having the self-awareness to find consistency. But let me ask you this really quick on a side note. How do you recommend, both of you, to find that consistency? Because sometimes I fear, like, let's just use the gym for an example, not our business, and just say, okay, we wake up and your foot kind of hurts. And you're like, honestly, it's probably not the best for my body to go to the gym, but also are you tired and lazy? So I'm the type of person that I'll push until it's like, all right, now it's a stress fracture and you're off your foot for a month, right? But like, what are your all's tips in business to really find kind of that steady state where you can plug, you can jump up, but you come back to that baseline?
I get the sense here, and I think I can relate to it as well, that Tim, if you were doing something that wasn't pushing you to the absolute limits, you wouldn't find it interesting. I feel like you're the sort of person that needs to be pushing themselves to their limits to get excited. I've had these experiences before where I feel like, things are on kind of cruise control right now. I don't feel like I'm pushing myself as much as possible, and it's not as rewarding. Maybe I'm just making assumptions here, but I feel like you're similar in that way.
Yeah, I mean, it's gone through phases, right? I think that the focusing on the what was like my early double-edged sort of success and downfall. Like, I'm going to run this big business. Like, I'm going to do these things. This is the what am I doing? How am I, what am I pushing myself to do? And I think that it has changed to more of a focus on how and why. And so when I think about like my workouts, or when I think about like even the rate of growth, I was so fixated when I first got into real estate of doubling my business every year, which I was able to do like for the first 3 years right out of the gates. And that was the what, and that was the focus. And yet there was a lot that was lost in that. Some growing too fast is its own problem, because oftentimes growing too fast, there's ego involved, right? So that's going to have to die at some point to get to the next level. Because ego is not our amigo. It's not gonna actually serve in the long run to create a sustainable business, a healthy lifestyle, and an impactful culture. Because it defies collaboration. When we get too me focused, we miss out on the power of we focused business, which is really all great businesses find a way to handle the we question, even with a bunch of powerful me's at the table. How do I, going back to your question of like, yes, I push myself to the limits. Yes, that's how I keep going. But I think having had so many moments where I've fallen flat on my face or had to like feel like I've scraped and rebuild, I feel like focusing now on how I grow, how it feels, how my clients feel, how my team feels, and then why I'm doing it. What's the epitaph on my tombstone that motivates me to show up differently, and staying calibrated to that why does change the what, for sure. And sometimes it involves me actually slowing down so that I can go fast in the long run.
Yeah, it feels like through your own personal experiences, you have, in a sense, matured. Like your initial approach was like, let's just fucking go. Let's let's push it to the limit. And then you've kind of learned from that experience to be a bit more realistic about how to approach things.
Learning.
Yeah. So I'm cautious of time here, and I feel like we're at you at 19 right now. So I'd love to hear what happened from 19 to now, and your kind of progress from the paint company into real estate to Dore.
You've painted, you broke your back, you herniated a disc, you're laying flat on the floor. You're starting from scratch. Like, what happened next?
Yeah, so I went through like most of my breakdowns follow this cycle. You talk about the entrepreneurial roller coaster. So I get success, I get a little hubris, born of success, hit myself on the ceiling of whatever my own character limitations are, have the downfall, whether it be physical burnout, emotional burnout, spiritual burnout. Usually they all go together. When I hit the bottom, usually there's some kind of spiritual renaissance that has had to occur. And I've gone through several of these like spiritual awakenings, and then I ramped back up. And so the one in the end of my 20s was really significant, or sorry, the end of my teens. So like between 19 and 21, I got into real estate. But there was this moment where I came out of college and I had all this, I made more money than I'd ever made in my life. I paid off my school and I had money left in the bank. I was getting great job offers right out of college one of them was to be a VP for a construction company. They had an offer to move to Georgia and start a branch down there in the painting world. And I said no to everything and everyone. And I caught a whimsy to go learn how to sail and do mission work and philanthropy in the South Pacific. And so I took a stint living 6 months abroad, giving all of my money away, painting, like rebuilding little tin structures in Palau after a typhoon had rolled through there, learned how to sail in Hawaii. Went through the Palau, and Palau is like a little island nation of like 250 different islands with 20,000 people spread out among them. And so we were just showing up with a team of people, giving out free hugs and free construction work and concerts. And so I did that until I ran out of all of my money. And then I rolled back into the mainland, totally disillusioned. The herniated disc that had been kind of survivable in the tropics, like as soon as I rolled back to the mainland and like the I don't know what it was, whether it be the pressure or the cold or whatever, but it just accelerated my ailment to where I would really quickly started losing my ability to walk. And that's when it was just happenstance. You asked the question of how do we balance these things, and I think for me a large part of it has been just trying to catch the green lights. Matthew McConaughey wrote the book. And it's highly recommended, but he talks about being aware of the green lights when they show up. And someone walked up to me randomly at a restaurant who had been following me on Facebook and said, "Hey, have you ever thought about real estate?" And I said, "No." And they said, "Well, here's a packet of information basically." And I remember like, I've got nothing else to go off of. Like I can't be doing this construction thing because I'm in chronic pain. And so that's how I got my license. And I was 21 and I couldn't walk really, and I was in chronic pain. So I started at this kind of very low spot, and Yeah, it's been 11 years selling real estate since then. So a lot has happened
So,
a lot. Good.
did you ever join a team? Did you join a great brokerage? Did you have a mentor, a coach? Like how did you go from, I just got my license? Where were you at that point? Because I
Yeah.
think a lot of agents have this kind of misconception or misunderstanding of where to start. And I think every person's different. I have this consultation with people all the time where I feel like I might be wrong, but I don't feel like a team's for you. Or where did you really come in the door at real estate?
Yeah, so I started at KW, and at that time their focus was being a great training and organization company. I benefited a lot from following the systems and processes that they had laid out. I think the bigger win was I had a close friend who was really a key part of getting me into the business, who was there to push me and script practice with me every day. And so I started off just practicing what to say in calling for sale by owner properties. And so I didn't have, like, I had a sphere, but there wasn't a lot of people that were like, okay, 21-year-old Tim, sure, we'll buy a house through you. There was a lot of people being like, let us know when you close your first few deals, Tim, like, good luck. And so, like, my first few deals really came from calling the people of like houses that I had painted. So people that like knew my character and trusted me because they'd seen my work ethic. And so I sold a few of the houses I painted. And then I spent that money on an MRI, found out I had a broken back and a herniated disc. Then I would spend my next closing on a back surgery because I couldn't walk upstairs uh, to show houses. So, like, what did I do? I started, I just did what people told me to do. I called A through Z on my contact list. That was the first thing I did. And I got my first piece of business. I'll never forget it, in the B's. And it was from a painter who had kind of quit on me. And I was like, oh, I'll kind of skip this person because it was like, there was this, like, I didn't love how we got out of business together. I loved the guy, but I was like, is this person really an ally? Screw it. They told me to call every person. I'll call. And I remember it was the most honorable call because he actually referred me his mom, who was trying to buy her first house. And so, like, I helped his mom buy her house, and I was hooked. She was so gracious. She knew it was my first transaction. Uh, I couldn't walk up the stairs. So I literally sat on the floor and I had to learn how to do showings the right way, which is not showing the house, but asking questions as the client shows themselves the house, and really having to get into their experience of, like, what did you think about the master bedroom upstairs? Because I can't see it. And I really had to actually shut up and listen and wait my turn because I was genuinely curious what the master bedroom looked like upstairs. And so the thing that was my greatest obstacle actually became my greatest gift. That's what I would say is, starting out for me was just trying to find a way to turn all the obstacles into the opportunities. Just follow the basics. I called through A to Z on my contact list, got like a dozen pieces of business by the time I got through it. And then everything else was just cold calling, door knocking, for sale by owners, open houses, and just following the system that was put out there for me and not trying to reinvent it, not trying to be someone who knew something I didn't.
So you started out as a solo agent, but you went somewhere that I do recommend for new agents, Keller Williams. There's coaching, training. You had a mentor and you listened. Again, what you did with the painting, you're a good listener and you're following what people who have already done this are telling you to do. And so I feel like you are good at internalizing it before you kind of personalize it, which is a really good benefit to help you learn. So many people are like, I'm getting into this, I'm going to do this. And they're just picking all this random stuff. They're not listening to anyone, they're not following any systems. So I love that you did that. And that's kind of how you got your first few deals.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that I also know that I also have been humbled enough to see the value in building off of other people's systems and processes. And so that would be my advice for any new agent starting off, is to get in an environment where you feel like you can be around people that you can let your hair down, like a culture that you feel like pushes you but also accepts you, that you feel like you've got a clear roadmap of systems and processes to follow. Mentorship is irreplaceable, especially when you're starting something new.
Something else that I'm picking up on here is, going into that role and that position and saying that you called up every single person in the phone book to try and get these deals. I think for most people that is really difficult. And you were talking earlier about how when you were picking was it your major or whatever you wanted to do at school, communication was the scariest to you. So someone who's maybe starting their own business, getting into sales, and they are scared of communications or picking up the phone and getting on the sales, like what advice would you share with them to build up that confidence? And is it something that you think some people can learn, or is it something that is just natural that you were born with?
Well, first off, to clarify, the phone book I think would have been easier than my phone book. I think cold calling actually felt more comfortable for me because I could call strangers. They didn't know who I am. I could just use my charisma to make a powerful impression.
Yep.
The scariest call was calling my phone book. And that's what I called A through Z, was calling all of my contacts on my phone. And I think that's where a lot of agents, they have that imposter syndrome of, who am I to help these people with their transaction? And that was the big question that plagued me over and over again over the last decade. Who am I to be this broker? Who am I to be this team leader, this talent attractor, this business builder? And I had one of two choices. I could either wait for the success to prove that I was that person, or I could preemptively decide, who am I not to be this person that solves these problems? I've handled 100% of what life has thrown at me so far. I'm still alive. We didn't even get into the one near-death experience that occurred between the ages of 15 and 25. That's a whole other podcast. But, like I've survived everything that life's thrown at me. And so who am I not to be the one that's solving these problems? And I think having the courage to handle that mindset question early on is the single biggest contributor to my success, because I didn't need to wait always for the success to prove that I was that person. I was able to bring that mindset in, pre-built in, almost tricking myself. And then realizing that it was the fact that I had done something like painting, which I'd never done before, and leading people, which I'd never done before, combined that together and succeeded at that made me realize I can take any problem in any industry and do any role within that problem, and eventually I'm going to figure it out.
So it's this kind of relentless kind of putting yourself outside of your comfort zone and building up that tolerance. That's what it kind of feels like.
Yes.
I don't know about you guys, but I feel like fake it till you make it gets such a bad rap. And I don't think it should, because and it depends on how you take it. If you're faking it, like you're pretending and you're making stuff up, that's one thing. But what tended, you faked it internally to put yourself in the person who would be able to achieve these things, who would be able to do these things, someone who is already successful and working hard to get there. So you fake that mentality to yourself to put you in the right space until you made it there. And it seems like you keep doing that at multiple stages. And I think fake it till you make it is great.
Yeah, I would endorse a slight adaptation of that, as like a phrase that I would use as more true to me would be claim it till you make it.
Okay.
Because
I love that.
I don't know that I ever faked it, because I always had the care to follow through on my promises. Like if I was going to make a promise to walk with someone through a transaction and give them a great service, like I knew that the promises that I were making were all grit based. And that's what allowed me to feel like I was in full integrity and that it wasn't a fake. And so the thing that I had to kind of claim before I could make it was that I was going to be able to handle what was thrown my way in the transaction.
In your own mind.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So we use affirmations a lot within our team now for that very reason, because we realize, like Stephen Covey says, there's always two creations to everything. There's a first creation that it has to occur first in the mind before second creation can manifest as productivity, a building that's built, a goal that's achieved. All the second creations that exist in the things that we do started as a first creation in the mind. And if you can master the first creation, then there actually really is no limits to our lives. Because as Walt Disney said, if you can dream it, you can do it. Really, this is the lid. And if you take the lid off here and then you're willing to just keep having the courage to dream audaciously big, I actually don't believe there are limits.
I think that's normally a misalignment in most people, is that they have one or the other off. Like I've met some of the hardest working talented agents who here they can't make it because they just, no matter how much money they make or how great the deal was, they're so negative. They don't believe they can do it. Every day they're like, oh, the market's effed. Just the negativity from their brain keeps all that hard work from really showing up and helping them flourish, or the opposite. Like it's all here, but they won't pick up the phone. Like they know they're going to be great and be amazing, but they will not knock on a door. They know they're great and they're going to be amazing. They are not holding open houses. So they're like, a lot of times between the brain and the actions, there's a huge misalignment. And somehow you found the way to really align that really early on.
Failing forward, the clip notes on the real estate journey, 21, it was a crazy year. I sucked when I started. I feel like I sold 3 homes my first 6 months. And then after I got back surgery, I sold 30 homes my second 6 months. So it was like a 10X just from removing the physical ailment. The following year, I sold 60 homes, and I did that as a solo agent, at 22. And I like quickly started realizing I can't do this alone. Like I really need people. I need a team. And if I can't build a team, I'm going to join a team. And I was, operating under a challenge then too, that there's rules that have to be followed. And that was my other problem is I've got to do this and follow the rules. In Oregon, you've got to be a broker for an agent for 3 years before you can get a principal broker license. And you can't hire agents to work underneath you unless you have a principal broker license. So then my vigilance had to be directed towards making a case to the real estate board that I should get an early exemption. And so I had to go before the Oregon Real Estate Board 3 different times applying for this exemption. And they kept shutting me down saying, basically, you're too young. And then I had to bring the statutes that age was not a qualification for rejecting this. And eventually I showed them that I had had 100 transactions of experience and that was equivalent to like 10 years of real estate experience based on how the average agent sells homes. And it was like 12 angry men. I'll never forget that day that they approved me like a 5-4 vote with the condition that they better never see me again or hear it negatively about the decision to make me the youngest principal broker in the history of the state of Oregon. And so that was a key moment of like going from selling real estate to then moving into building real estate agents. That is where I feel like I've been on the 10-year journey of failing forward, building up teams, scraping, finding what didn't work, having to scrape and rebuild. And so that requires a lot of courage to be willing to fail. I mean, there's been so much failures operating with a chip on my shoulder, realizing that is not the highest frequency of energy motivation, right? And that doesn't create the kind of relationships that I want to have long term. If everyone's just angsty and trying to prove something to the world, that creates a toxic culture. So I had to learn that the hard way too.
I love
Just
that.
Feel like there's so many good stories we can dip into here, Tim. You've got such a fascinating life, but we are coming to the end, running out of time, unfortunately. What I'd like to just tap into before we wrap up is, it sounds like you've built up this grit, you've got this relentless approach to how you've been building these businesses. I think that's fascinating. But then you also have this mental clarity, and you're talking a bit about spirituality. I would love to just anything you could share to people on how they can work on that in the last couple of minutes.
Oh, wait.
Quick fire.
Yeah.
We stumped him on that one.
Yeah.
Like, how much can I say on here? What are the requirements for an international podcast?
Yeah.
UK is going to shut you down.
Yeah. I will say plant medicine has been a huge help for me, and that's a whole other podcast on its own. But I think that like tangibly within business, if I were to bring it full circle to, the death of the ego, which I've had to go through several of those, has been the greatest impetus for growth for me. So some people experience ego deaths on psychedelic mushroom trips, and that helps them. And that's why it helps them, is because their ego dies somewhere along the way of realizing that we're just a flash in time, right? And really what matters is how we integrate, how we coalesce with the world around us is as important as what we create within ourselves. And so, I have the 10 C's that are our guiding principles within our business. And so, how have I tried to apply my own spiritual enlightenments and breakdowns into my business? It's just been calibrating my personal mission to my business mission, calibrating my personal values to my mission values, and then like in the journey of aligning to my values, like connection and compassion and collaboration. Connection, putting relationships first. Compassion, putting empathy into action every day. Collaboration, focusing on we. Collaboration, I got my little place hat here. I've been watching these guys for 3 years on the outskirts, working within their coaching company. And it really took a lot of building my own brand, didn't happen without collaborating with Side Inc. They did so much to help me build my own brokerage. And then as I realized I'm in the process of scaling that, like I would love for this just to be the thing that I own and I do by myself. But that's a mirage, right? No one succeeds alone. No one does anything powerful alone. And so I made the decision after 3 years of kind of like on the outskirts to align my business with Place at the end of last year, because I realized that my lessons have all been around teaching me to lean into collaboration, teaching me to dissolve my sense of self into serving and leading other people, being a set of shoulders for people to stand on. Because that's actually where I find fulfillment, and that's actually where I find results, is in succeeding through others. So I don't know if that answers your question of like the spiritual. I think any spiritual renaissance involves some download of love, something that says, you know what, there's an eternal wellspring of energy inside of me that actually is the force, right? It is this love that holds all the atoms together, that holds all the molecules together that make me up. And my ability to tap into that love energy, be motivated by that, align my life to it, that is my God, and that is my North Star. And I think any spiritual renaissance that I could wish for or pray for anyone would just be simply to grow in an awareness of the infinite amount of love that exists within us and around us, and that love can power you to do anything, solve anything, conquer anything, heal anything. So there's my spiritual endorsement.
If I
I
could
feel
take
like,
one,
well, I
yeah,
just going to say, I think a lot of entrepreneurs are in that kind of lost state, and haven't quite got mentally aligned. And hearing that from you is really fascinating. But yeah, I think we're going to have to wrap things up there. Really appreciated your time, Tim. We do have a question. So from our previous guest, we have a question which I'll send to you after this, and if you can record that, we're going to put that into the podcast. And then we want you to come up with a question for our next guest.
Great. I love that.
How do you deal with confrontation between employees and team members? Really important question. The first thing that comes to mind is a framework that I've coached a lot of people I've worked with through and continue to coach myself through and return to it, is the 4 Agreements. Phenomenal book if you haven't read it. And it starts with being impeccable with your word. If there's conflict and the result of it is someone stepping out of the values or out of character, I think that's a great place to jump off. Be impeccable with your word. Agreement number 1. Don't take things personally. Agreement number 2. That one's hard, by the way. It's great in theory, but a lot of times conflict and confrontation comes from egos being bruised, or people being sensitive and taking things personally that they shouldn't. And so I think these are great frameworks that can help mitigate a lot of confrontation before it even happens. Agreement number 3, don't make assumptions. And if you are going to make assumptions, assume the best, but always coming from curiosity when resolving conflicts is critical. And the last agreement is always do your best. And I like to think that everyone's doing the best they can with what they've got. So if there's confrontation or conflict within a culture, those agreements are a great guiding place to guide the individuals through. Now, as far as a framework for how to actually deal with conflict in the workplace as a leader, my go-to move is to empower those in conflict to solve it between themselves. If they can do that, they become stronger. They become better at conflict management, and ideally, there's more connection on the other side of that resolved conflict. And if they can't resolve the conflict on themselves, then I do ask that they involve me or another leader within the team or HR or whoever would be applicable to solving that conflict. And it's really the old biblical principle of going directly to the person. If that doesn't work, bring someone else along. And if that doesn't work, then you bring it in front of the collective or the community. So that's a short answer on how I would solve confrontation between team members or employees.
People are going to have to tune into the next one to hear what Tim's question is.
I love it. Thank you so much, Tim.
Excellent.
Thank you, Jamie. I've got to go to the beach now. Actually, I have 2 more calls, but I'm going to the beach
Living
today.
the life.
It stops raining. This has been such a pleasure. Thank you guys so much for listening to another episode of Business Brain Dump.
Thank you, guys. See you later. Cheers, Tim.
See you guys. Thank you.